In our last unit, we talked about adjectival steps, also known as modifiers. We're going to keep talking about modifiers, but in this video, we're going to talk about how to arrange them in relation to a base clause. So we're going to talk about branching modifiers. But first, let's review what modifiers are. A modifier is what we discussed in our last unit, an adjectival step. We talked about 3 ways to begin a modifier: a participle, which is a verb ending in ing, an adjective, or a possessive pronoun. So you find a noun in your sentence that you want to modify, and you add a modifier, sort of as an adjective, adding information about that particular noun. So now let's talk about what we mean by branching. When we talk about branching, we're referring to where the modifier is relative to the base clause. If it comes before the base clause, we call that left branching. So if here's the base clause, and if here is your modifier, it's coming before the base clause, that's left branching because it's on the left of the base clause. If it comes after the base clause, we call that right branching because here's your modifier. It's coming after the base clause, so we call that right branching. It's to the right of the base clause. If it comes in the middle of the base clause, we call that mid branching. So here's your base clause. You're breaking up the base clause with your modifier. So it's mid branching because it's in the middle of the base clause. So to do a left branching modifier, you want to find the subject of the sentence. It's really important that you're talking about the subject of the sentence, because if your left branching modifier is about something other than the subject, it's going to be really confusing. So for left branching, you have to make sure you identify the subject of the sentence and you're writing a modifier about the subject. So it should describe the subject of the sentence, the grammatical subject, which should be near the beginning. Most base clauses, the subject comes very quickly. So a left branching modifier alludes to the subject of the sentence that hasn't arrived yet. So you're getting this branching, modifying phrase about something. If this is the subject, it hasn't happened yet when you get this left branching modifier. So you're modifying it before it even comes. So you're sort of hinting at or alluding to the subject that's coming. You're creating anticipation. That's a big part of a left branching modifier. So you're creating anticipation for the subject. So left branching modifiers look forward. So here are a couple of base clauses that I want to add left branching modifiers to. And let's recall our 3 ways: participle, adjective, possessive pronoun. Those are our 3 ways. So our first base clause says, "My tea provided necessary warmth on the cold winter morning." So I've got to figure out first, since this is left branching, what is the subject? Well, this is the subject of the sentence. The simple subject is tea. So I'm going to be describing the tea. Then I need to figure out which of these 3 options would best fit the situation. Any of them could work. I could make a phrase in any of those kinds, but what kind of phrase comes immediately to mind? What feels most natural? I think I'm going to go with the adjective kind. So if I say spicy and sweet, comma, my tea provided necessary warmth on the cold winter morning, that works. I've added information about the tea. It's spicy and sweet. Must be a chai of some kind. I could also do a possessive pronoun, something like, it's steam filling the room, my tea provided necessary warmth on the cold winter morning. It's being the possessive pronoun for tea. And of course, I could do a participle. Filling the room with its steam, my tea provided necessary warmth on the cold winter morning. Filling, ing, verb, is a participle. So, this next one. The base clause is the recycling bin is not a garbage can. What comes most easily to mind is, again, an adjective phrase. Bright yellow and meant for paper, the recycling bin is not a garbage can. So, bright yellow adjective describing the bin. It's an adjective modifier. Now, the effect of a left branching modifier, as I said before, is that it creates anticipation. When you read this part of the sentence, bright yellow and meant for paper, the reader starts wondering what it is you're going to talk about. So it sort of has a momentum. It creates a thrust forward in the sentence because the reader wants to find out what you're talking about. That's why it's effective. But you have to make sure that the thing you're modifying is the subject of the sentence. Okay, right branching is a little easier. You find the noun you wish to modify. It doesn't have to be the subject this time. Preferably the noun is either the subject of the sentence or a noun toward the end of the sentence. A right branching modifier alludes to a noun that was previously mentioned because a right branching means it comes after the base clause. So RBMs, right branching modifiers, they look backward because here's your base clause and here's your RBM. It's looking backward at something you previously mentioned, so it's adding information about something you've already talked about. It's clarifying. So, same base clauses, but this time we're adding to the end. So my tea provided necessary warmth on the cold winter morning. The first thing that came to mind was a participle. So my tea provided necessary warmth on the cold winter morning, comma, making her feel cozy in the cabin. So it's describing the tea still, but it makes sense because the tea is the subject. So to continue talking about the subject is natural. Here we have a right branching modifier. The recycling bin is not a garbage can, comma, gross and smelly. In this case, I'm using adjectives, but they're referring to the garbage can. So you can have another noun and have your right branching modifier refer to that noun. I could easily write one that also refers to recycling bin. It just depends on what you want to modify. For mid-branching, you can find any noun within the sentence that you wish to modify. If the noun is a subject, you don't want a very long modifier because it would separate the subject and the verb by too much stuff. So if you're gonna modify the subject in the middle of the sentence, make sure it's something short that's not gonna delay the reader too long to getting to the verb because the reader wants to get to the verb. A mid-branching modifier alludes to a noun that has just been mentioned. So mid-branching modifiers interrupt the sentence to add immediate information. So there's a sort of suddenness to mid-branching modifiers. Again, they're interrupting, but that interruption adds emphasis to the modifier. Because if it must be so important that you're interrupting the middle of the sentence, then that makes it feel important. So with the mid-branching modifier, we find the thing we want to modify, and then we put commas, a comma right after the noun, and then a comma at the end of our modifier to separate it out. So we can use one of the modifiers we already used because most of these modifiers are free, which means you can move them anywhere. So my tea, spicy and sweet, provided necessary warmth on the cold winter morning. But it has a different feel from when it was a left branching modifier, because you're interrupting the sentence for this. So, and it's describing a thing that we already know what's describing. When we had it spicy and sweet, my tea provided necessary warmth. We didn't know what was spicy and sweet until we kept reading. So they just have different feels to them. Similarly, the recycling bin, comma, bright yellow and meant for paper, comma, is not a garbage can. The putting it in the middle of the sentence, putting our modifier in the middle, has a different feel than when it was before because it interrupts it. It adds clarifying information immediately. Okay, last examples. Now for each of these examples, I just made myself a a rule. So I'll hit one of each kind. So this first one, we'll do a left branching, starting with a participle. The base clause says the snow began to fall. So making the road slippery, comma, the snow began to fall. ing participle, need a comma to separate it out. And there we go. So left branching participle. Notice what's making the road slippery? The snow. The snow is the subject of the sentence. It has to be to do a left branching modifier. Second example, the base clause is Kendall drove home. I'm going to do an adjectival step using an adjective, and I'm going to make it right branching. So we need a comma separating it out, and then I added an adjective. Kendall drove home tired and frustrated by work. So the adjective tired describes Kendall. Because you're right branching, it's usually going to modify the subject of the sentence still. And our last base clause, Nellie elbowed the opposing player, we're going to use a possessive pronoun and we're going to do a mid-branching. So what's the noun in this sentence that I could describe? Well, it's Nellie. So we're going to add our mid-branching right there. So Nellie, comma, her aggression getting the best of her, comma, elbowed the opposing player. Now, you don't want to go too much longer than this because you'd be separating the subject from the verb, and the reader needs to see that those things go together. So you wouldn't want to go too much longer than this if you want the reader to not be confused. And we always want the reader to not be confused. Okay, that is it for branching modifiers. Mindeman out.